Greetings, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Chaucer's Books virtual author discussion with Stephen J. Pyne and David Carle. My name is Michael Takeuchi, and I'm the events coordinator at Chaucer's Bookstore, a 47-year-old independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California, by our owner and founder, Mari Carle. To purchase tonight's books, browse other titles, or check out our upcoming events, please go to our website at chaucersbooks.com. While our guests and I are the only ones seen and heard on this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's event is being simulcasted on and recorded for our YouTube channel and will be available to view after completion. So if you're on YouTube, please type in your questions via the chat. So let's begin. Before we start the main portion of tonight's event, I wanted to briefly bring out Mike Eliason, the Public Information Officer of the Santa Barbara County Fire Department. Prior to his current position, Mike was a photojournalist for several decades. And in that time, he's won numerous awards and saved this reporter's hide with a great photo more times than I can count. In about 2 months, Mike is coming out with his own book. It's a book of photography that we will celebrate. It's called Santa Barbara and Beyond, the Photography of Mike Eliason, which is published by Shoreline Publishing. So welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so thankfully that's not Santa Barbara as we currently are behind you right now.
No, it's not. It's actually the fire we had off East Camino Cielo a couple years ago, right around November.
We've been pretty lucky so far. However, California has been pretty hard hit. You know, what's it like for you guys at the emergency center, operations center, being around? You just you have to be on the call and ready at any moment right now, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Sadly, there's no longer a fire season in California. It used to be come around May and then would end around November. But with the drought situation and the increasing lack of rain, when we do have a rainy season, it's really stressed out the vegetation. And like I said, that fire that's burning in the picture behind me was 2 days before Thanksgiving. So that was too late for normal fires. And then we've had the Thomas fire, of course, burned in December. So fire season's year round now. So everybody has to be prepared and have a plan in place in case that next fire does begin. Wow.
In your other life, in your previous life, I should say, you're a great photographer, and I'm hoping you put that photo of Walter Payton, the football player, in your book. But this book coming out is much anticipated because Mike is nationally known as a great photographer, and here's the cover of your book. And when is it coming out?
It's actually in the printers now, and it's going to be out the last week of November, first week of December. It should be coming in, and it will be available at Chaucer's.
Well, thank you. And we're going to have an event mid-December for you, I think, aren't we? You and Jim Buckley will be out there. Here's a shot. It's a little bit more pleasant than the fire. I always love this. This might be Wet Wednesdays.
Yeah, it's one of the Wet Wednesdays off Santa Barbara Harbor.
Wow. And where did you shoot this from?
This was a drone shot that I used to take the picture. And the drones have really changed photography because it adds that third dimensionality that you really usually used to have with the regular photography. So this adds another element and lets you see things a little differently.
Interesting. And then I'll show one more photo here that I love. And this was not something you set out to take, but you happen to capture it at the perfect moment.
Well, this was for California standards. I'm sure in Arizona, you're laughing at us. In Texas, you're laughing at us. But this was we don't get very many electrical storms here in Santa Barbara. And this was a March storm that came through. And what can go wrong? I'm standing on a wooden wharf with a metal tripod in a puddle with an electrical storm going by. So what could possibly go wrong? All I needed was my 2-iron. To really capture them. But I was able to get the pictures. And this picture actually, when I tweet out my pictures for work, this actually got a lot of play, and it ran nationally and internationally because of the so many lightning strikes that occurred in that short amount of time for Southern California standards.
It really is an incredible photo, Mike, and we look forward to December when you come out. But I got one more question for you. Were you a kid that ran with scissors?
No, I wasn't that bad, but yeah, I do like to push the envelope a little bit and try and put myself in a position where you need to get in the position to get the picture. And if you don't get the picture, you weren't in the right position. So I always try to put myself there where I can get something.
Well, you are too humble, and we're really looking forward to this, Mike. And thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you in a couple months. Okay.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to tonight's panel because I'm really interested into what they have to say. There's back to the fire uniform for a sec. Yeah, it's troubling out there now, and it is problematic, and the fires are burning with much more ferocity than we've ever seen, and since I started going to fires in 1985. So I'm very want to hear what they're going to be talking about tonight.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And now for the main portion of the event. We at Chaucer's are so pleased to bring out Stephen J. Pyne, the author of The Pyrocene, How We Created an Age of Fire and What Happens Next. And also we bring out David Carle, who recently published the second edition of Introduction to Fire in California. Both of these books are published by the University of California Press. I thought it was important that we bring these men out to present to help us understand what has been happening in the Golden State. As Mike said, climate change, drought, and other factors, as most of us know, may have made California's fire season a year-round affair. To the north of us, our state is burning, and we worry about not only the humans and the animals, but for the wondrous gigantic trees that we identify as our own. Stephen J. Pyne is a professor emeritus at Arizona State University, Go Sun Devils, and author of many books on the history and management of fire, including Fire, A Brief History, second edition, and Between Two Fires, A Fire History of Contemporary America. Welcome, Stephen.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Great pleasure to be, it's nice. Well, in a macabre way, it's nice to be able to speak to a group that understands fire, that recognizes its significance. I'm sorry it has to be under those terms, but that's the way it is. My book is about words, but I've prepared a short visual summary of it. So let me leap into that.
Okay, I'm going to go off camera here, okay?
Okay.
So go ahead.
And share screen. Well, it's not, there we go. Well, the story of the Pyrocene for me began personally in 1967 when I joined this bunch, fire crew at the North Rim of Grand Canyon, and I returned for 15 summers. So I learned about fire sort of up close and personal. But I also, as I began researching fire in other parts of the world and thinking about it globally, I've been struck by comments people have made recently about our future. Not only that it is dire, but that it is strange. So strange that we have no narrative by which to connect it to the past and no analog by which to guide us. And in the book, I address this issue because I think we've got a great narrative. It's the saga of humanity and fire. And I think we have an apt analogy that when you add up all of our fire practices, we're creating the fire equivalent of an ice age, or what I call the Pyrocene. So fire has been on the planet as long as vegetation has been around. We have fossil charcoal over 420 million years old, but it was always embedded in what we might call living landscapes. So fast forward, last 2.5 million years, the Pleistocene, a series of ice ages driven by Milankovitch cycles. Some of the features, 80% of the Pleistocene was glacial, 90% of the last million years. And it would be broken by these sharp interglacial warm periods that would then edge down ever more deeply into the cold. except our present period, which is much longer, or seems to be getting longer, and is certainly much, much warmer than anything before. So how did that happen? It happened because during the Pleistocene, a creature arrived who seized control of fire, captured it from nature, and began to use it for his own purposes. Actually, it was a group, a genus of hominids, and eventually only one of them has survived, leaving the sapients as the fire monopolist on the planet. This is what we do that no other creature does. We've used it for hunting, foraging, all kinds of aboriginal economies. We learned to change fire's environment by cutting, drying, draining, doing all sorts of things, really agriculture from a fire history perspective. And then wanting still more stuff to burn, we looked into the geologic past and began removing what I think of as living landscapes, once living, now fossilized biomass, and began to burn that. And that really, in one way, is part of a continuous story, but it also marks a phase change because it's different. In the past, the quest for fire had always been about finding sources, new stuff to burn. Now it's about what to do with all the waste from the burning. And in the past, in living landscapes, it always came with ecological baffles and barriers. There were checks and balances. You can only do so much before the system would react and force you to change. But with fossil fuels, we can burn day and night, winter and summer, wet or dry. California has no fire season. Well, the Earth now has no fire season because we can at any time and any place. And that has really broken the old barriers. We began using this new power to replace open flame in all kinds of settings. So our domestic habitations, our cities used to burn as often as the surrounding countryside. They were made of the same materials, responded in the same way. Now modern cities don't burn that way anymore. And agriculture. Most agriculture outside of floodplains, and even some in floodplains, used fire, the sort of ecological jolt that fire provides to reset the sequence of planting. It fumigated, it fertilized, it did lots of things. And now we rely on natural chemicals for herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, and it's delivered by some kind of fossil fuel running machinery. And how about wildlands? Well, thanks to industrialization, powered by steam, we began cracking open much new territory. These are all scenes from the 19th, early 20th century US, enormous havoc underway. We had an era of mega fires, an order of magnitude larger and more lethal than what we've seen in recent decades. And then it quieted down. It gave rise to reaction to what we might call state conservation. It was really a global project to fight back against this sort of widespread havoc. And at the core of it was fire control, because fire was the most visible emblem, the most apparent sign of a sort of primitive disorder in society and landscapes. So that also changes how we fight fires or cope with fires. This is how you would have done it in the Great Plains in the 1830s, setting back fires, using fire, and then simple means to swat out the flames where you didn't want it. And this is how we do it now. In effect, we try to counter the force of free burning flame with apparatus powered by industrial combustion. And what we've seen is the consequences of that, ecological consequences, and the self-defeating character of firefighting if you continue to do this in fire-prone places. And I point out that all of this happens even in the absence of climate change. The federal agencies in the US reformed their policy in 1968, 1978 to restore good fire. Having sought to take all fire out for 50 years, we've tried for the last 50 to put good fire back in. Now we can add on to this climate change as a performance enhancer. So it isn't all climate change, but it is mostly fossil fuels. Megafires are a product today of the developed world. So let's go back to our ice ages. Characteristics: ice-informed landscapes, great glaciers and ice sheets, all kinds of periglacial phenomena, outwash plains, loose plains, pluvial lakes, permafrost, et cetera, drop in sea level, mass extinctions, and the arrival of a creature shown here doing what he did best, bringing fuel to the fire. Well, now I think we're in a piracy, and climate change is beating to the autumnal rhythm of fossil fuel combustion. We're seeing fire-informed biotas, a shift in biogeography, the recession of ice everywhere. Ice is being driven away, the last vestiges of the ice ages. We see a kind of peripyric landscapes forming in association with it. Maybe these giant smoke palls that we see are the equivalent of outwash plains. We're seeing a change in sea level. We're seeing a mass extinction. And now we have this creature no longer bringing fuel to the fire, but as here, fleeing the fires that he has created. This is from the Fort McMurray fire in Alberta, in a way, a place that was burning its candle at both ends. So add it all up, and it seems to me we have been living in a pyrocene. You've lived the story, so now here's your chance to read the book. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to bring out, I'll give you an proper introduction, David. And I wanted to bring out David here and your thoughts. Oh, go ahead and stay on, Stephen. Your thoughts on Stephen's incredible work. This is quite remarkable.
Well, as I was a young man getting involved through my state park ranger career in fire ecology and getting some training and some experience on the ground, I became aware of Steve Pyne's books, and there are many, many of them. You should look into that and see how many of them you can get on the shelves at Chaucer. I think you mentioned how did we meet? We have never really met very much in person until we did an event like this just earlier this week. But I did take one of Steve's earliest books, Fire in America, to a fire ecology conference where he spoke, and I went up afterwards and had him sign that book. And at the time he said, "Boy, there's an oldie but a goodie." So I've already been around a while. I became aware as a reader of some excellent material.
Interesting. Well, David, allow me to introduce you and give you a proper introduction. You're the president of the California State Park Rangers Association. You're a retired park ranger, and you're the author of 13 nonfiction books, and including introductions to California's water, air, earth, soil, land, and fire. But you've also written 2 novels, and I have to ask, before you talk about this book, what were your novels about?
They're both have environmental themes. One is a mystery, a murder mystery with a park ranger protagonist, and I'm not giving away much. The title of the book is The Spotting Scope, and a bird watcher spotting scope is the murder weapon, is a bludgeon. But the other novel is historical fiction, and it grows out of a lot of the water history that I got interested in. It's set in the Mono Lake Basin and Owens Valley in the time when the city of Los Angeles was in the 20th century, when the city of Los Angeles was taking water out of the Eastern Sierra to take it via the Los Angeles Aqueduct. So, but I wanted to tell that story as a novel, be able to work in the minds of the characters and from a lot of different angles in that way.
And what characters were they, like Mulholland, and
He's in there.
he's in there?
It is fiction, but it has a few real characters like that. That book, by the way, is called Mono, and
Okay.
for the Mono Basin. And yeah, the other characters, the primary characters are fish and game biologists based on a real character, a real person who, a young man who was early on involved in battles to understand, his job was in the Mono Lake Basin. But then later, when the effort began to save Mono Lake from the impacts of these diversions, a half century had gone by and more, and this man became a person of importance in the testifying with the knowledge that he had gained as a young man, and when he just fresh out of the university. So that was a compelling story, and there's a love story. And
all right, well, that'll sell the. I'll have to get this, and thank you for telling me about that.
Mono,
This Mono,
a novel is the subtitle.
okay, we'll take a look at that. But for right now, let's talk about Introduction to Fire in California. This is the second edition, and if you give it a brief introduction and what the time frame is of completing this particular book, because obviously it was updated from.
Sure, it'll be more fun if I can start sharing my screen, and I have some.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and do that? I'm going to step out then.
Okay. Let me see if I can bring it up. There we go. It's over here. Okay. Now it's going to work. So this is the cover of the book, Introduction to Fire in California. I wrote the first edition 13 years ago. And obviously, a lot has happened in regards to this fire story in the state of California in particular. And so as in the last 5 years or so, and especially in the last couple of years, as we've started to experience some real intense mega fires in California, the editors of this from the University of California Press asked if I would put together an updated edition. It has a lot of pictures in it, and that's why I really wanted to show a few pictures to, as I described. Let's see if it's going to advance. Oh, please advance. Why isn't it advancing? There we go. So there's 5 sections of the book, and it opens as a natural history book about the nature of fire. What is fire is the opening question, and an explanation that's sort of a Bill Nye the Science Guy kind of explanation about fire. And then it goes into a segment that goes across all of California step by step through various landscape type regimes. It's called Fire and Life Across California. And it takes a look at how vegetation types have adapted to the presence of fire that's always been there on the landscape, and in different amounts and at different impacts. And so, for example, after this Chaparral fire happened I think this was near Lake Berryessa. I took this picture of the following spring after some rain had arrived, and the incredible fire follower flowers that were happening. That's one of the many and really fascinating things about fire ecology. Then there's a section on history, and a lot of what Steve Pyne just talked about is reflected, but with the California focus, there was a California light burning debate in the early 20th century that was affected by the national policy of the Forest Service in regards to this whole question of, can we completely stop fires from coming in because there's something evil, basically, versus there were proponents who were saying we should do as the Aboriginal people of California did. We should use fire, and we're going to get ourselves in big trouble if we don't. Well, you can look at that history. Some of that history is involved in this picture and the next two. The next portion of the book is about issues, burning issues, it's called. And burning is one of the issues, the question about light burning, as it was called then. Now we talk about prescribed burning. But there's no better illustration of part of the problem in relation to a particular kind of habitat of these giant sequoias that are unique to the California Sierra Nevada. This photo is taken in Yosemite National Park in 1890. Take a look at the little people. They're full-size people, but take a look at how they are dwarfed by the incredible trees here in this sequence, this group of trees. And look at the tree on the left where the big fire scar is. That's evidence that this living tree has survived quite well, quite adeptly at the fires that were natural in their regime back in the 19th century. Well, Yosemite National Park made the mistake, I would say, of much of the nation in wildland management in trying to suppress all fire. And by 1970, so 80 years after that first picture, here's that same big tree on the left with the fire scar. The rest of them are there, but they're hidden by all this growth of young fir trees that came in. And those big trees that are to be protected by the national park were at great danger at this point of fire coming in, because fires that would have stayed on the ground and not been a danger to the crowns of these trees at this point would have climbed right up into the crowns. And so the good news in Yosemite National Park is that, and Steve Pyne mentioned this, is in the 1970s, change was underway, and it was this picture with my wife in it. There is the same general group of trees today, or well, it's 3 years ago now, but it looks like this today, I'm happy to say. They did a lot of clearing at first, and then they reintroduced fire and allowed fire to work again in this grove of trees in the Mariposa Grove. Now, this is really of interest. We can talk about it because there is a fire right now affecting and threatening the sequoia groves in Sequoia National Park and Sequoia National Forest to the south. So, but moving on, the fourth part of the book is called Getting Ready, Life on the Edge, and it's really aimed at the large percentage of Californians today that live in areas that are at high risk of fire or on the edges of wildlands, in the wildland urban interface. And this very dramatic scene of a roof fire that got started undoubtedly by embers as a wildland fire was blowing embers from nearby. Is one of the eye-catching images. There's so many that you could use in a book like this, and I did use many, but I also used this one. This is one of my neighbors actually, who built a house very much conscious of the kinds of things that can help to harden the outside of a structure and to work in a landscape that is prone to and will have intermittent fire. This is in a Jeffrey pine forest of the Eastern Sierra. And so that's all that and other techniques for preparing to live in these fire zones are part of what the information is in the book. And then finally, the final part of the book really in focusing on how we deal with the challenges had to deal with these updated challenges, including COVID. And there's a segment in there about how COVID has affected not only the firefighters and how firefighter management and teams work, but also about evacuation centers and those kinds of things. Incredible picture here taken by Noah Berger, a photographer who this was from August of 2020 up in Napa, amazing thing. And just the last shot I'll share is that the other types of issues that have necessitated a second edition have a lot to do with the mega fires, the kinds of fire challenges we're facing that have grown so big recently, the connections as the scientists see them now between the climate crisis, climate change, and what we have going on with drought and dryness and heat. This picture taken from space is of September 5th. So this is just about a year ago, a little over a year ago now. The smoke column here that you see on the edge of California and going off into Nevada was from the Creek Fire, which became the largest fire at the in terms of a single fire in its acreage that California had experienced, and an incredible release of energy as a whole forest of trees, much of it standing dead trees, was engulfed and released energy. And we're talking about energy when we're talking about fire. We're talking about energy when we're talking about climate change, and if I can use Steve Pyne's term, the pyrocene. So that's what I had for you for just as a brief introduction to what's a lot. There's a lot in the book, and I hope you'll look into it. The quote on the screen here is from one of the pioneers in prescribed fire, in returning fire to the forest, Harold Biswell, and his point that he's making is that fire is. One thing else that Biswell had said in another quote is that everything that's out there that's good in the environment evolved with fire. And he says, keep in mind that fire is a natural part of the environment. And we have to struggle with that as we deal with the tragedies that fire can bring and is bringing to many, many people now, in terms of the disasters that follow, as we have now planted so many of ourselves, so many Californians in the hazard zones of fire. So thanks for letting me be here tonight. I really appreciate it. Appreciate Chaucer's books, and for this invitation. And now we can talk.
Well, David, I had a question. Since you've been a park ranger for decades, and now you're the president of the Park Rangers Association, what is your personal perspective on what's happening over the decades? And how do you feel about how things are going?
I feel frustration. As we mentioned in passing, both of us just in the last few minutes, that a half century or more of policy change, if we want to look at a policy that got set up over a century ago, in terms of trying to just say, with some hubris as humans, that we can put out all the fires, don't worry about it, we're going to take care of that. Well, we've learned, of course, we cannot, and that we are suffering from that attitude. But the changes that did start, that the agency people and the researchers and the scientists and a lot of folks who've written about it, we've been aware of what needs to be done for a long time. We just haven't done enough of it. We're still throwing an incredible effort at the battling against fire, and not enough has happened in the attempt to make peace with fire and to become, make humans once again a fire adapted species in California. Not enough has happened in a way that's been effective yet, and so that's my frustration. I will mention, back when I was in high school senior in Orange County, one of the many Santa Ana wind-driven chaparral fires that happens in that region came through, and where I was living out on the edges in a very rural childhood in Orange County, at a horse ranch, my father and brother and I and another man saved buildings that saved all the horses in the stables, but meanwhile our house burnt down, and I experienced that incredibly tragic thing of losing all of your possessions and having to start over in terms of possessions. So I felt that, and then I had a career where I got to get involved with prescribed burning and learn about fire ecology and do a lot of interpretation and education with the public, and that is part of it too. So, yeah. So
how did you start your career in forestry and being a ranger and getting involved with
I actually started as a park aide, as many rangers careers do, a seasonal summer job, when you're out of college and you got to make some money during the summer. And I worked on the beaches of Southern California, the state beaches at Doheny and Mini and San Onofre. And then I was very impressed with the professionalism of the people that I was working with. And so I was able to have a degree in wildlife biology to move into a permanent status with state parks. And I worked around the state and ended up the final 20 years or so working in the Mono Lake Basin.
Interesting. So if we can bring back Steve and David, if you don't mind unsharing your screen there, and we can, and Mike, if you want to come on out here, we'd love to have you back out here. Stephen, how did you, you're an academic. How did this become such a personally interesting topic for you?
Well, before I went to college, a few days after graduating from high school, I found myself on this forest fire crew somewhat by accident. And it really changed my life. And for a long time, I loved it. It was the best of all lives and the best of all places, as far as I was concerned. But it was totally distinct from anything I did academically. I was never at a place that taught fire. Not many places did back then, certainly not routinely. Fire really wasn't part of the academic curriculum. Very few people in biology were interested. It was mostly in forestry, which was concerned with controlling fire. So I went through a whole academic career that had nothing to do with fire. They were just two completely different lives. And then eventually, after I got my doctorate in 1976, I'd written a biography of an American geologist and explorer, and have written other books in that theme. I decided I had no jobs and decided I should combine these two experiences and try to look at fire the way I had been trained to do as a scholar of history. And I got some funding. The Forest Service worked out an arrangement, a cooperative agreement. So I had funding to do the travel and research. I didn't have a salary, so I continued to live off my summer earnings. But that started, and then eventually I got an academic job and have continued. And
it's wonderful that you have. And what I found fascinating about your presentation is that a lot of this would happen in the absence of climate change. However, you said climate change fueled a lot of what's happening. And I was thinking, I think in the Washington Post about typhoons in South Korea affected or exacerbated to some extent some of the fires that happened here last year, like the Paradise Fire. So this
climate change is certainly real, and it's acting as a performance enhancer, and it's going to continue to apply that pressure. There are lots of things we can do in the interim to mitigate against the effects. We can certainly keep our towns from burning and stuff like that. We know how to do that. We've solved that in the past. For me, it's like watching polio come back, to see towns burning again. We fixed this a century ago. So there are lots of things we can do, but we do have to get the climate change genie, if not back in the bottle, at least back in the ground. But if we even had the climate now that we had 50 or 60 years ago, we would still have a fire problem. And we would see more fire, not less. We would see more good fire and less of these eruptive mega fires that are not doing a terrific amount of good. Not all of the area burned by these fires is destroyed by any means. Some of it may be enhanced, but when you have these kinds of explosive fires rampaging into communities and through municipal watersheds and into sequoia groves, this is not how we should manage fire. So we don't have a lot of good metrics about fire. Burned area is a very flawed one, but it's what we have. So we would actually, my vision is that as we ratchet down our fossil fuel burning, we'll be ratcheting up our burning in living landscapes. And that comes as a surprise to many people because they think, wow, it's all climate change. We'll get the climate change under control and then the fires will go away. No, we're actually going to have a lot more fires. more burned area, more engagement with fire in living landscapes, and the challenge will be to do it in the right way.
Mm.
But I would also point out that while it's not all climate change, almost all of our land use policies and even our fire suppression policy, whatever the theory was, it would have been impossible to apply without fossil fuel power behind it.
Mm.
So it's not all climate change, it is mostly fossil fuels.
Mm.
These kinds of fires are a symptom, a pathology of developed countries. David, please go ahead.
Go ahead, David.
Time out.
Go ahead.
Any words out of your mouth. You just wanted to say that one of the things we talk a lot about is acreage. And yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that acreage is not always a great way to, it's one way to characterize a fire, but within those boundaries of any fire, there's going to be areas of unburned land and areas that, you know, a whole variety of impacts. But the thing I wanted to talk about is that last year, as I was wrapping up this new book, was the year that California exceeded 4.2 million acres of wildfire. And that number has been repeated many times. And this year we're up over 2 million. And that is really focused on something to keep in mind as we talk about these. And these are being really, challenging and mega fires with lots of destruction. But we need to keep in mind that the best information we have suggests that the California natives, the Aborigines that lived here for they would say forever, but before the Spanish arrived, used to probably apply over 5 million acres of fire and live with that and work with that. Different character of the fires, but over 5 million was what maybe is what needs to happen every year in California if we could somehow get back to those those conditions. So when we talk about 4.2 million being incredibly disastrous, the disaster is that we've got 40 million Californians now, almost 40 million. And they are now planted themselves, or they are now out in parts of the landscape that are very dangerous fire regime areas. The Native Americans didn't purposely go set up their villages right in the middle of large chaparral fields with unburnt, chaparral shrubs that are going to produce 40-foot flames. So I mean, we've most of the people in Southern California, I assume that we're talking to mostly a Santa Barbara audience, but most of them understand that that this forest fire that we've been focusing on is not exactly what the whole story is. And my book and Stephen's books talk about the rest of the story. And chaparral is a whole nother dilemma. The chaparral fire community is almost impossible to stop fire in without completely paving it or turning it into some other regime of grass or whatever. It is a part of the problem where prescribed burns are really not a very effective answer either. And what's more important, I think, in that particular part of the world is the question of where we put our houses, and it's a real difficult one for California because a big part of our history is making money off real estate and policies related to real estate. And so anyway, it's a complex, this whole story is complex. And one of the things that I would encourage people is to learn where you are. What is the fire regime situation in the vegetation community where you live, in the region around you? How long has it been since there's been fire? What is the fire return interval there? And that's all part of this preparedness and being an informed Californian when it comes to this topic.
You brought up a really good point, David. I just can't stop thinking about the Thomas Fire and of 2017 of where we had built our abodes, and then but what really affects me is the ensuing debris flow that happened in Montecito in where things were built, and several people died from that. And it's going to be a constant issue in California where we can build, who comes in here, where's a safe place to build. It's a problem that I don't think we'll solve in the near future.
But we have to address it.
We do.
Keep doing
We
what
do.
we're doing. It's not working.
It's definitely not working.
By the way, I've got a real dramatic picture in this new book, a new picture of the Montesino flood area taken from the air by a firefighter, I think from Santa Barbara County, who happened to be in a helicopter, and great picture.
Well, I wonder if that was Mike.
I'll look.
Okay.
It's credited in the book. I'll have to look.
Stephen, did you want to add anything to what David was saying?
No, I mean, I think conditions are desperate, especially in California, but they're not hopeless. I mean, we know how to keep towns from burning. We know how to keep power lines from starting fires under the worst conditions. A lot of these are just plain infrastructure issues and urbanization issues that we've put aside, and fire is now forcing us to confront them. These things can be fixed really in a handful of years if we really wanted to. We could address the worst hazards, and we can get our landscapes into shape. We know how to do it. We know the variety of things. There's no one solution. It's a cocktail of treatments adjusted to particular places. But we know enough to do that. We could do that in a few decades if we chose. Climate change is a tougher challenge, but we created all of these issues. We can begin uncreating them.
I have a question from Ruby, and she wanted to know percentage of fires human caused versus natural phenomenon like lightning and things like that. Are there figures available on causes of fires somewhere that people can look at?
Yes, my
Go
book
ahead.
has some of that.
Okay.
I'd love to be able to say that. And humans are the primary source in California. This may be not true for all other places and elsewhere. Lightning is a big source beyond what humans start. The other natural starter of fires around the world would be volcanoes, volcanic eruptions, and things. But in California, it's lightning. That picture that we saw that Mike put up of the lightning in Santa Barbara Harbor, I've got a map in the book that documents 20 years of the where the most lightning strikes in California, and it doesn't strike there, Mike. It's almost nothing compared to most of the lightning is over in the east side of the state and down towards the Four Corners area, the desert coming up through the summer monsoons. So hundreds or thousands of lightning strikes and hardly anything in the Coast Range, and yet this is another thing that maybe is changing. In recent years, we've had these, especially 2020, an insane number, many thousands of lightning strikes in one couple of day period episode, and a lot of that over on the Coast Ranges. And so anyway, there's variability. The answer is humans are a big part of it. When you look at how humans start fires, most of it's by accident. Actually, a relatively small number by the classic thing about a kid playing with matches. A relatively small number are arson. Unfortunately, too big of a number, but arson is part of it. But most of it's accidental. A lot of it's equipment. Operating equipment under conditions that where sparks can start a fire. And before I forget, can I tell you that the Matt Udko was the from Santa Barbara County Fire District, I believe, who took the photo that I got permission to use from the department in my book of the Montesino flood, the post fire Montesino flood.
Yeah,
So, go ahead.
If I could add to that, it really, the percentage of lightning versus people really depends on the place. Some places don't have much lightning, so it's almost all human. Nationally, it's about 9 or 10 to 1 human caused to lightning caused. The places where lightning is dominant are usually places where there are not many people. And partly that's a result of choice. We've created parks, we've created national forests or wildlife refuges. We've excluded traditional fire practices from it. So in other parts of the world, you can see that even places that would have lightning, the lightning effect is eliminated because people burn early in the season and in effect protect all the areas they want protected before lightning arrives. So lightning would have started many more fires, but it doesn't because it's already been burned by people. So it's really an interactive story. It's quite interesting. But lightning isn't going away. And even though lightning is not very common in the coast ranges, it does seem to start an inordinate number of problem fires when it does.
Fair enough.
And perhaps there's some, it's not solid science yet, but there's some stuff has been published just recently about whether increase in lightning may come with the climate warming. And I think if I can just make a uninformed guess, there's a lot of energy in our atmosphere. There's a lot of energy in the ocean, and we've put all this warming into the situation up there, and maybe it shouldn't surprise us that energy is being released, perhaps at a greater level as lightning. I don't know if that's valid.
Well, it just seems that PG&E or SoCal Edison are in half the stories of causes of fire in California. That's, it's some of us are very skeptical about things like that, but I'll resist commenting further.
No, that's
Rubio.
and they're working hard at it because they have to, because that's if they're going to have their utility be successful, they have to stop, they had to face bankruptcy, PG&E, and I have to, they're out there in my neighborhood right now in the Eastern Sierra. Amazing amount of work going on replacing poles and lines, and commitment by PG&E recently that I read about to underground their lines, which is an incredibly expensive, big job, but boy, will it help.
Well, I hope they modernize, because right outside our apartment we just moved into, my wife and I, over the last 5 months, we've had 2 transformer explosions. So Ruby, as well as Jackson, wanted to know about what can individuals do to protect themselves and prevent the piracy from continuing? Great question, both of you.
Well, I think there are a number of things you can do individually. If don't build in a place that is going to be prone to bad fires, but if you are in such a place, then as Dave showed in his neighbor, build in a way that will make your place defensible. Will protect primarily against the embers that seems to start most of these fires. And a few simple things can be done. It's not that hard. Other than that, we simply need to build up social capital and ultimately political capital to take on large public projects, of which climate change is a good example. But the rest of our public lands, all of our public assets have been ground down for decades and underfinanced. All we do is respond under emergency conditions. I mean, this is like building a public health system only by creating emergency rooms in hospitals. This is not effective and it's very expensive. So those are the 2 things I think as individuals we can do to help.
David?
Oh gosh, Steve said it. I will say this, in terms of protecting yourself, when that moment comes, And for most of us who happen to be in those parts of the state of where it's very probable that it will come in time in our lives. And you have to evacuate, and you're told to evacuate. If you've done everything that's possible to be ready, that's, you know, you can hope that when you return, maybe it'll all be a success story. But I guess the one thing I would remind people is, if you look at history of evacuations, there's a lot of people have died out on the road. They waited too long. They got stuck in jammed traffic. Fire came and swept over them. And that is a big mistake. That's it may be possible that you can shelter in place. There are things that all depends on how the circumstances. It's a very dangerous thing to try to survive a fire that way, but that depends on what you've done to get ready, right? And so the important thing is, I think, is to just get out of the way of the firefighting regime, and if you're in that mess, go early.
Yeah.
Don't get caught.
We've had to evacuate 3 to 4 times, you know, in Santa Barbara, me personally, but, you know, never mandatory evacuation, but always when it's recommended, we go automatically. I think that's, as opposed to an acquaintance of mine who decided to stay and watered down his house and ended up running for his life and being saved by a sheriff's officer who happened to come across the flame. And he was very lucky that sheriff was there. Otherwise, the fire would have overcome him.
Awesome.
So David wanted to know. Oh, David had a great comment. Everybody should have a go bag. That's a good idea for anyone. Which brings us to Jackson's question: is about how do we stay up to date on fire news, and you know, obviously, what makes it so important for us to plan ahead?
Can I up to dateness? The internet is how we all stay up to date on many things, if you know where to go. There's a website called NCWeb. It stands for Incident.
Yeah.
NCWeb is a great source for the current status of fires. It's maintained by CAL FIRE and the federal agencies that fight fire, and you can basically see what the updates are on any fires that are burning, that are active at that moment. So NCWeb, take a look at what comes up when you search that, and that's one.
Yeah, I think it's INCIE web.
INCIWE.
Web.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then let's see. This one's actually from Mike. Any recent fire news or predictions in Santa Barbara that we can be informed on? Mike, if you're still on. Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Well, what they were talking about is good things. Yeah, have a plan, and for current or expected time of fire behavior for our area, this is the time of year where we start to get the winds. October is usually our hottest month of the year, and echoing what everyone's already said is to be prepared. You can follow myself on Twitter or my cohort Daniel Berticelli on Twitter. We get our information from the incident commanders, and we tweet it out for the news and other agencies to use. InstaWeb's always a good one too. And we want you to go to readysbc.org to sign up for alerts and for any type of things that updates on incidents as well. But yeah, be prepared, because this is the time of year where we get those winds. There are some areas of the front country that we're concerned with how old the vegetation is. But we want you to have a plan. And like they talked about, it's that Ready, Set, Go plan, or go to readyforwildfire.org. And you can learn how to harden your home and have a plan in place, because the fire might start while you're at work and you might not be able to get home. So have a meeting place, an out of area contact that you can call, and a meeting place for your loved ones because you might not be able to get back to your house. But if you are home, and we like to preach ready, set, go, but don't wait for us to tell you to go. If you don't feel safe, please leave, and you can always go back if it's okay to do so. But we don't want you to wait. If you feel uncomfortable, if you feel nervous or scared, then pack up and leave, and get out of that area, and don't wait, and don't pull off to the side of the road. A lot of times we see people pulling off to the side of the road, taking pictures and all that stuff, and they get in the way of fire equipment coming into the scene. And a lot of equipment will be coming from out of the area and won't be familiar with the area. So and they're going to be busy doing other things. The engineer's going to be busy driving, and the captain's going to be looking at notes, trying to figure out where they need to go. And the firefighters are going to get ready, to what they need to do. So we want you guys to clear the area. Don't be a looky-loo, and get out if you don't feel comfortable.
Thanks, Mike. Well, we're a little bit over time, but I wanted your guys' final thoughts. But I'd have to make a quick comment, David, that this is Introduction to Fire California was finished through the end of 2020, and now with these new fires here, you may have to do a third edition in the next year or so, unfortunately.
I'm getting too old. Somebody else may have to take that on.
Gentlemen, I just wanted to ask if you had any final thoughts you wanted to share with people about your work, your books, anything. So I'll let Stephen go first.
Well, no, I'd just like to thank you for the invitation to present the book, and for a second chance to form a tag team with David. It's been a real pleasure. And it's been fun to have sort of the ground truthing, the particular details of place within the global context. So I'll just offer my thanks for that.
And David?
Thank you again. Yes, and thank you, Steve. It's an honor to speak on the panel with you. Everyone should realize, as I've said, that he's written a lot of books, and not just not just a focus on the American Southwest or the United States, but on the world. And a lot of good information out there. But for myself, I just would say that the book has only been out now since August 20th, so about a month, and I have no idea how it's doing, but it's meant to be helpful. It's meant to be an education in fire ecology, not as a textbook, but as a primer for Californians, for all of us. So I share it. This is self-serving for me, but tell your friends the book is out there. Both books are out there, and spread the news. Thank you.
I don't think either of these books are self-serving. I think they're necessary. They are necessary reading, however. And I wanted to thank both of you for the work that you've done over the years, and for all the work that you continue to do to serve us. So thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us, and have a nice evening.